guy with the fastest lap in qualifying didn't start on pole, and the guy who won the race on track didn't win the race eventually. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix. Madness, chaos, anarchy in some way. We've got it all. And let's add another thing to the mix. Oscar Piastri lost the race on track by 1.1 seconds. Had he not braked 10 meters too late, or maybe a couple of meters too late in the pit lane during his pit stop on lap 31, he would have saved a couple of seconds. He lost the race on track by 1.1 seconds. Just to put it out there, we could have had anyone winning. And we're not even talking about the man who started on pole, Kunal. This is what Formula One should be all about. And at the Inside Line F1 pit stop in Mumbai, we had 140 people experiencing the race live at social together. I can't begin to tell you what the vibe was like. What was it like in the Viaplay studio when you were doing your TV work over there this weekend?
The vibe was that for once we were really scratching our heads so hard to understand what's happening with strategy. It almost seemed like a Formula E race to me, that there was a point of time when there were five or six drivers all in it to win. Okay. There was Verstappen, there was Norris, there was Piastri, there was Leclerc, there was Hamilton. Suddenly came Russell out of nowhere. And you were like, you couldn't really predict who actually could have won because all of them had the pace to win. And, I also kept waiting through the race. Yeah, when is it that the Ferrari will fall back in its actual position? Guess what? They didn't. I was then waiting, when is it the Mercedes is going to fall back? And the fallback would have meant that McLaren would have left them and then pulled a gap, and then Max would have eventually caught them and pulled a gap and then
That
chased
didn't
them
happen.
again. Nothing of it happened. And my goodness, I mean, I don't want a 4-week gap to the next race. I want the next race to come literally the next weekend, because if this is what the 2024 Formula One season is going to be, then I want 52 races, a race every weekend.
Yes, I remember. This time last year, Belgian GP, I remember being very tired. 1 o'clock in the night in India time. All of us were recording the review. It was a particularly average race, and I remember particularly discussing the point, do we need 24 race weekends? Do we need time to miss Formula One? I raise up my hands and say I was wrong. We don't need time to miss Formula One. We just need competition. If this is the blueprint of what Formula One should be like in the Liberty Media era, I'm here for it. Because what we saw at the end was drama, not just for the Formula One broadcast, but for Drive to Survive too. Imagine losing out on your best ever race win without any doubt. That is one of the best Formula One drives in the modern era. But now there is a caveat to it. 1.5 seconds, 1.5 kilograms. That every lap, Kunal, has to account for a tenth and a half somewhere. And in a race where he just won by half a tenth, I don't know what to feel anymore. By he, I
Yes,
mean
that's
George
true.
Russell, of course.
Yeah. And there is, of course, a weight penalty that one either has or doesn't have. In the case of George, the minute you are a lighter car, it's of course faster. Around Spa, maybe it's a little more. The weight penalty is a little more because it's that longer lap, so to say, and it's so many undulations and so on. And firstly, I have to say this: it's a Mercedes operational error. I know, thanks to David Frost and even more so Bernie Collins, the former head of strategy at Aston Martin, she gave a great insight. Something Sundaram spoke about in the pre-race show as well. There isn't a cool down lap, so they
Yeah.
couldn't do the rubber pickup in Spa, which probably was one of the factors that George Russell. Firstly, he wore his tires down too much by extending his stint as long as he did, right? But my
Ooh.
point is, Fernando Alonso, who finished P9 and now is eighth, also did a one stopper, right? So it's not also did a one stopper. Let me finish. Also did not have the cool down lap to pick up rubber, but wasn't underweight. The scrutineering sheet after the race says that.
I know why. It's because Aston Martin cannot drop the one thing that Mercedes have dropped this weekend: the sandbags. Ha ha ha! The word is back. We have used it for the first time since Bahrain 2021, and I feel incredible. The sandbags are really off. So let's put it in context. How many laps? He pitted on lap 10, didn't he? Which means 34 laps on the hard compound tires. And by the end, I remember him losing around a second to Lewis Hamilton per lap. On an average, give and take, sometimes 1.2, sometimes 0.6, sometimes 0.8, thereabouts within that range. But that much, but to still win on merit when the team has said, go ahead and fight in cars that are now theoretically closer to racing. That clearly means that Mercedes is not just there on luck. It really is there with a combination of two things: a car that can genuinely withstand pace in clean air, which Lewis Hamilton consistently showed by being roughly 8 tenths faster than Oscar Piastri on average in the middle sector. Yes, McLaren were running a low downforce setup, but 8 tenths faster per lap on an average? It's no joke. That car is fast. And that's on the old floor. The new floor wasn't used because Mercedes didn't feel comfortable going to a new setup in tricky conditions. It could well make the car faster the next time we go to Netherlands. So we have legitimately three big teams fighting for race wins every weekend. And to hammer that stat in even further, 3 out of the last 4 races, I almost had a Rahul Gandhi moment. 3 out of the last 4 races have been won by Mercedes, Kunal. It's
Who
it's
would have imagined?
not me.
Yeah.
Not me.
I mean, when they won in Austria, we were like, yeah, the top two protagonists crashed out, which they did. When they won in Silverstone, we were like, yeah, it was too cold a condition, and Lewis Hamilton in those conditions and mixed weather, always great, and they won. George Russell here pulled a strategic masterclass. What a call to sort of extend the tire as he did, and to pull off that win. Nobody expected it, not even Mercedes. And to me, Samuel, there are two things that stand out. Firstly, of course, he had a lighter car, like you mentioned, maybe a tenth. If even if that's a benefit, that's a benefit. You got to accept that. The second is the track actually got quicker as the race went on, and that was an insight George Russell shared post race, saying the track went quicker, which meant that even though he was running out of tire life, so to say, he still had a track that was getting quicker, and the evolution was higher because they all started on a green track. And the third, but the most critical thing, is why could Lewis Hamilton, with DRS, not overtake George Russell? It was not down to a lighter car; it was down to setup choices. George Russell had a slightly lower downforce setting that he opted for all through qualifying and the race. And guess what? That was one of the reasons Lewis Hamilton couldn't catch him.
So the reasons why people have won or not won a race this weekend: uh, engine penalties, choosing a different setup between high or low downforce, messing up a pit stop, not having a car within the legal weight limit, and having a slightly messed up start. I still count that, Lando Norris. This should have been and could have been your win. Piastri was good. You are better as it stands right now. This could have been yours. So, 5 key reasons why people didn't win. That truly defines what Formula One is all about. And to talk about all of this, we have the Inside Line F1 podcast. We are India's best sports podcast as awarded by Hindustan Times and the top 1.5% of all podcasts listened across the globe, across all podcasting platforms. My name is Somal Arora. I'm the voice of the MotoGP Indian Grand Prix, the Indian Racing League, the Indian Formula 4 Championship, the Indian Supercross Racing League, and also the Carlos Sainz fan podcast, which today is on a bit of a holiday. But as always, Kunal Shah is here with me, the former marketing head of the Force India Formula One team, which is had a bit of a reincarnation and has scored points in its new avatar today. We will talk about that in a bit. And he's also, in fact, he was rather also, in fact, working on the live TV broadcast of the Formula One races in Norway for the Viaplay network. If you were in Norway, you would have seen his face on TV. One talking point, Kunal, that we need to understand in all of this is that as much as it is a win taken away from Russell, it is a win that has been claimed by Lewis Hamilton. His start was impeccable. His runs in clean air were honestly champion like. and his composure all across when having so many different cars behind him on different strategies was a masterclass. This is very much a Lewis Hamilton win. And again, a driver of the day performance had it not been topped by Russell and his incredible performance.
I think we're seeing a rejuvenated Lewis Hamilton. Initially when the season started, he was cryptic. Something's not clicking my side of the car. Congrats to George for doing this. But suddenly, when the Mercedes has brought these upgrades, made it easier for them to drive the car, to extract more lap time in an easier way. Lewis is there. He's the one who's now taken 2 wins. Of course, he inherited the win today. But there's also this question, Mercedes did not sabotage Lewis Hamilton by any
Hmm.
chance in the race today, because he was, like you said, in free air, running up ahead, leading the race, controlling the race. And what just happened is drivers around him who he was competing with ended up pitting, and Mercedes decided to not have him being undercut by those drivers. So they said, let's pit him. In the meanwhile, George Russell said, can we try going for a one stopper? And Mercedes was like, yeah, why not? Because George was way back and
Yeah.
was nowhere messing with the front runners at that time. And suddenly it seemed like it was working. The tire was not giving away. And then you're like, I have track position. The one stopper seems to work. Something that no pre-event simulation actually said could happen. So let's just make it work. Which is why Lewis was so upset post race, because he of course lost out to a one stopping George Russell, who was not as quick as him this race weekend. Point number one. Point number two, it was a different strategy, which probably Mercedes didn't inform him about as early as they did. Could he have extracted more pace? Could he have done something different to go and win? So that's why Lewis actually said it on the post race press conference and then in the cool down room, saying, I had more tires each time they asked me to pit, right? But each time Mercedes asked him to pit was just to make sure he doesn't get undercut.
But I still believe there was something left on the table. Had he been told slightly earlier, or had a bit of an idea, again, I don't think. Maybe if Mercedes told him earlier, he would have been able to extract more from the tires. But the point is, did Mercedes know earlier as well? I don't think they did. Because as you mentioned earlier, it's a very good point, Kanal. It was a green track when the simulations happened in FP1 and FP2. And by green track, a big part of it is not having enough rubber laid down. Spa has just been resurfaced. And Formula One cars are running here on the new surface for the first time. And when it gets rubbered in and has more grip on it, eventually it becomes easier to drive, faster, and less harsh on the tires, which is a big part of what happened today. And we were all confused. We were all shocked. Pirelli told us that the ideal limits for the hard compound tires would be 18 laps. Fair, which is close to what most teams adhered to. But Russell did 34 on them. And yes, he was losing time, but eventually he had track position, which we all thought would be practically useless at Spa because of how long the straights are here. This is it's like going out of the chessboard to kill another piece. You didn't know that could happen until it actually happened. It's phenomenal. You make your own rules on the way, and fair play to Mercedes. They did that. And the only question in my head right now is, what would you have done if you were Toto Wolff? Because at our Inside Line F1 pit stop in Mumbai, where we had so many people joining us and sharing their opinions on the race as it happened and also after it, a lot of people, and I agree with them, said that yes, Toto did the right thing. He did the right thing by making sure that they didn't race. Do you feel in the same boat, Kunal, somewhere?
But
Or should they
they
have
actually,
prioritized Lewis?
no, why should a team prioritize a driver? It's a 1-2. It's like what McLaren did last race weekend. They just wanted a 1-2. They wanted to secure their 1-2. That's what Mercedes were doing. They secured
Oops.
their 1-2. They just told them you're free to race, but leave each other space, which is actually better than being told hold position, something some of the other top teams end up doing as well. The other point to remember is when we look back in hindsight, it seems like George Russell had a brilliant strategy call, which he did. But imagine if his tires blew up. When I say blew up, I don't mean physically. I mean, they gave up 5 or 7 laps before the end.
It has happened, you know. Kimi
Yeah,
Raikkonen,
yeah.
Nürburgring 2005.
In fact, Lewis Hamilton wasn't at the 70th anniversary Grand Prix, finished on three wheels in Silverstone.
I think that was a bit of an accident rather than them extending. But yes, that can indeed happen.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, so what if George's tires would have given up on him? Then Lewis would have anyway taken the win, right? So what Mercedes was doing was they were just going for an absolute gamble with George, because let's also remember he started eighth, the last of all the top drivers that was
Yeah,
there, right?
exactly.
And suddenly, out of nowhere, he's got track position, and then he's like, "I can extend, and they decided, let's go and extend." So, of course, Lewis has said, he leans on his strategists, he trusts them, just that they didn't tell him beforehand. But like we're asking, maybe Mercedes didn't know beforehand this was going to work
Exactly.
out. They were taking it a lap at a time, saying, "Oh, competitive times, let's continue. Competitive times, let's continue." And maybe that's just what happened.
But you know what I've learned from this? I've learned that even though Lewis Hamilton might be leaving the team, Mercedes will not lack in a leader. And this is phenomenal. What do you want your lead driver to do in a race? You want them to qualify well, you want them to sustain pressure, you want them to pass decisively when the need for that arises, and you want them to be excellent at tire management. Four qualities that George Russell in this season has exhibited very, very well. And also picking up the pieces, which is also something he did very well a few races ago. I don't think Mercedes will ever feel the void of a lead driver per se. They will feel the void of Lewis and the feedback he brings in and the environment he creates and the kind of advice that he can give to people around and help build the team around. But the lack of a number one driver per se won't be felt. And in my eyes, today marks a day when Toto's George Russell project is complete. He has what he wants.
That's a very, very good way to put it. Toto's George Russell project. But they
And
fell
then he can start to
1.5
look at a new
kilos.
one.
Yeah,
Ah,
which is the
true,
Toto
true.
Kimi project.
Who also got an amazing move on the inside at Eau Rouge. Crazy, blows my mind. But you were right, and they fell short by 1.5 kilos on this whole project.
We should actually explain what happens, Somil, because yes, we know what happens post race. The fuel is drained out. The car is expected to be at the minimum weight level, car plus driver, and that's supposed to be 798 kilos, like FIA has explained. And then George Russell ended up at 796.5, right? So that's what happened. And when you're underweight, it's a straight out disqualification. There is no protest. There is no there is no argument. There's no debate. There's just that's what it is. And the FIA calibrated their scales in case the reading was different on the two scales, but the scales turned out to be well calibrated as well. So George Russell, incredible race, incredible strategy, and an incredible way to get disqualified, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And he falls back to eighth place. He had overtaken Checo Perez for seventh, but now he falls back to eighth place. And Lewis Hamilton now wins exactly, was it 11 years since he scored his first race win for Mercedes, I think?
Wow.
Yes. And he scored 84 wins here. Even if you were to take that George Russell and Lewis scored 1-2 or at least crossed the line 1-2, it's the first time since, I think, 50 or 60 years, Sawmill, maybe more actually, that there are four teams that have scored a 1-2 finish in the same season. Can
Are you
imagine
kidding
that?
me?
Yeah, and
Ferrari
then of
too.
course,
When did
yeah, Ferrari had they had a 1-2.
Oh,
didn't they?
Australia, was it not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh my word, what a season we are having. Wow.
And
Wow.
it's the sixth race in a row where pole hasn't converted to a race win.
Formula One, ladies and gentlemen. And you thought the sport wasn't coming back. Oh my word, it's back in how. So good, so good, so good. But also, interestingly, uh, the 44 coincidence is real. Someone on Twitter, and I know I should do my due diligence better by checking out the source, but whoever it is, you've done an excellent job. I will get back to you and I will retweet that one. But someone on Twitter found something very interesting that I have to read out now. The 44 coincidence behind this race. It is at $50 VT. Number 44, Lewis Hamilton. 44 laps in the Belgian Grand Prix.
So those
4.4
two we can
seconds.
confirm. Those two we can confirm. Yeah,
Yes.
Yes.
The third thing we can also do, which is 4.4 seconds, Oscar Piastri's missed pit stop which I mentioned in the top, which had he nailed it, would have been potentially a Piastri win. And also,
Which
document
also we
number
can confirm.
44,
We can
which also we
confirm
can
that.
confirm.
Yes.
Exactly. And document number 44 was the document issued by the FIA, which read out that George Russell has been disqualified. You believe in numerology, Kunal, and you
Which
bring out some very
also,
interesting stuff.
yeah,
This is
which
it.
also I can confirm. It was document number 44. So, document 44, infringement, car 63, technical non-compliance, weight. Published 28/07/2024, 18:53 Central European Time. Yes.
Which you can find on the FIA website. We're not kidding. It's
Yes.
actually document number 44.
So there
It's
we go. Numerology. And then, of course, 11 years since the first race win that he's had with Mercedes. So many beautiful stats and facts and coincidences have popped out that maybe now it's time to move on to something else, Somil, because we've, of course, have had several conversations about Mercedes, Lewis, Russell. Who do you want to pick next? Ferrari?
Oscar Piastri. Oscar
Let's do
Piastri.
Oscar
Man, I'm
Piastri. Yeah.
gutted. I'm gutted. And I mentioned at the top that pit stop, I mentioned it a second ago. It's a driver error. It's a clear cut driver error. Piastri braked too late in the pit lane. Nothing the Jackman can do about it, even if he's a huge Jackman. Tudum, dish. But yes, the point is.
But Hugh Jackman was on the Alpine. That's the problem. But
Oh,
anyway.
he was. You're right. Deadpool versus Wolverine. Nicely done. Well done. That's the kind of stuff you do before you're about to sell a Formula One team. But, but the point being, it's a driver error, clear as day. And Piastri gained 14 seconds in the last 13 laps, even though he was running on a slightly low downforce setup. And had he closed up, he would have had theoretically a bit of an advantage over Lewis, who was running a slightly higher downforce setup, and George, who was on very old tires. This should, could, and would have been his race win had it not been for that. But the thing is, you've got to look at it as you've got to put it in context of things completely. Oscar Piastri is still only in his second Formula One season. He's only born in 2001. So for him, it's quite a big learning today about how to adapt to these things. And the fact that he passed Leclerc with such composure was incredible. And I think it's good that he's learning on the brightest stage and under the biggest lights, because that's where you mature a little bit more. And today, tire management, which was traditionally his problem, didn't turn out to be that way. So I'm glad to see improvements.
Yes. You mean there's yet another race which McLaren can add to the could have won in 2024 box, right?
Oh,
Because it's just something that Oscar will learn. I'm glad the front Jackman was checked but not hurt, and that caused a 4.4 second. Maybe he just had to play to the whole numerology card out there. But Oscar Piastri was quick, and Zach Brown said that if the race was a couple of laps longer, he could have probably won. But the truth is, it had to end on the 44th lap because of numerology reasons. So it is what it is when it comes to Oscar Piastri. But I think incredible. I think McLaren was just not there in the mixed weather qualifying or the wet qualifying because they had set up the car for the race day. And the fact that both McLarens were just less than half a tenth away from each other shows that was the pace of the car, and both drivers actually drove to the pace of the car.
But Lando, what do you make of his abilities and his racecraft lately? I know that the start is just one moment out of an hour and a half race, but the weightage attached to it is disproportionate by some margin. And today, he didn't have the best of starts again. Unforced error, out into the gravel. That's where he went from P4 to P7, by the way, at the start. And the moment you lose 3 positions at the start, it is near impossible to get them back, even though you might have the fastest car, because everyone was so similarly matched. I feel it's a big miss.
I think, yes, the start sort of has a higher weightage on a lot of things, but that's because these cars are difficult to pass. Also, track position is vital, especially when the cars are so evenly matched. And another thing, Somil, which we actually almost discussed in the preview, but didn't really say it up front, was that uh, you know uh, the DRS train was making it difficult. First, Lewis Hamilton was leading a DRS train for the top 10, and then Fernando Alonso from ninth or 10th place was really leading a DRS train for several laps. So, it was just down to that. And Lando eventually just lost it at the start, lost 3 or 4 positions when he did, and that was it. And everyone's saying Lando and his drivers' championship and so on. Even on a bad day, Max Verstappen is still finishing fifth, whereas Lando Norris got outscored by Max Verstappen. So let alone the points that he lost in Hungary, he just lost more points in Spa.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Even on a bad day, Verstappen has actually extended his championship lead by 2 points. That is the Max Verstappen effect.
That is,
and while starting, and while starting 7 places behind.
Yes. And Max Verstappen has now finished fifth in 3 of the last 4 races, exactly the races that Mercedes has won. And his previous fifth place finishes was spread across like 5 seasons. Okay.
Sure.
So that's how it's been for Max Verstappen. That's just how it rolls. And, Red Bull, I would say, could have had more, but they just chose to bank on the wrong tire because they had the medium hard for Verstappen and Perez. So they were very pleased with how fast they still managed the race with Max. They said they optimized it, but when it came to Perez, and I know it's easy to just point at him, but he's run he ran half his race on the wrong tire, and that just sort of did him in.
Yeah, completely. But is that the best he could have done?
Checo Perez, I believe so, but he was just being overtaken because when he was on the medium, everyone else was pulling out all on tops, and I don't think there was a single driver in the top 8 who did not overtake him. Okay, and again out here, I strongly believe, Somil, that track position and even more so clean air was vital. We saw the minute Oscar got clean air, he said, clean air is king out here. And you said very well yourself how George Russell and Lewis Hamilton made the most of clean air, right? I don't believe the Red Bull cars had too much of clean air, even more so Checo Perez. So it was all in all just down to circumstances and the very fact, like Max has been pointing out, we just don't have the quickest car anymore. And not only has McLaren caught up, but here Ferrari and Mercedes were not that far behind for Red Bull to just overtake and drive past them.
Yeah, and again, this is a very funny circumstance now where Red Bull need a second driver more than they ever have, and this is where we are hearing reports that there is going to be a meeting between Helmut Marko and Christian Horner and the other decision makers at Red Bull Racing about what to do with Sergio Perez. And yes, that qualifying would have helped out, but what we saw in the race today probably didn't. And Red Bull didn't do any favors by putting Perez on that strategy. But I want to bring back the years a little bit to your time at Force India, Kunal, when you were also in that team. I just want to understand the psychology of the break, because I hear the MotoGP World Feed commentators say it quite a lot. And I've seen that also happen with some racing drivers close to me on a national level scale. But if you have a terrible race or an extremely good race right before a break, it tends to impact your psychology as an athlete. Does that impact the way the team views the driver as well? Because the driver, of course, will have that impact, but does that play on the team's mind broadly and their decision making or their perception of the driver?
Of course, it does. After a point, everybody's in the sport to win. Nobody participates because, hey, I want to finish 5th place and be happy with it. So, every single factor contributes to performance, whether it's an upgrade you're bringing, whether it's a sponsor you're bringing, whether it's a press release you're sending, or whether it's a driver you're hiring, whether it's a number 1, number 2, or even the simulator and the reserve drivers. You want to take these decisions, keeping in mind that everything is going to make the car go quicker, because that's what this business is all about.
No, but does it, I mean, just like they say, right, the empty mind is the home of the devil in Hindi, in a way. But does that mean that if you have a longer break, which means more time to think, that a negative performance has a greater impact on the perception? Because if there's a race the next week and you probably brush it off and be like, ah, screw it, we've got to focus on something else anyway.
There are two parts to this. First is you're only as good as your last race weekend. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though you and I are now 40 episodes in. By the way, happy birthday to F1 Stats Guru. He's not here because he's somewhere
What's his birthday?
celebrating
What's
his
Fernando Alonso's birthday also?
as is
wait.
Fernando Alonso.
Let me wish him a happy birthday.
yeah. Congrats on points. Yeah. Congrats on Fernando for scoring a point. But yeah, back to what I was saying. You're only as good as your last race weekend, right? Much as we are only as good as our last interview that we do with one of the paddock personalities, or the last episode we've released, last insight we've cracked, last interview we've had, etc. Right? So that's one thing. But having said that, the teams sift through a lot of data, a lot of situations that they know they could have controlled, couldn't have controlled before they make a driver decision. They won't base a driver decision just based on one or two results. They will see trends. They will see succession plans, and how does a particular driver fit in now versus fit in 3 years from now. And we all know Helmut Marko has said, in fact, on Viaplay, that they will sit on the Monday after the race and in general discuss about the future racing car drivers who will race for the Red Bull brands. So is Checo Perez under discussion, even though he has a contract? I would like to believe he absolutely is, just given the vast gap he has had to Max Verstappen in 2024.
So that's Perez. We had a few other notable things in the race as well. F1 Stats Guru's birthday mate, Fernando Alonso, P8 for Aston Martin. That's good. Esteban Ocon, Alonso's best friend in the points as well, P9. And is that... Oh, hang on a second. Is that the...
Ricciardo scoring P10.
Yes, that's also a story too. Yeah. So some sort of chaos in the midfield as well. So it's been a fun race everywhere in a way.
It is, and I believe, this is, I think, how many teams have scored points, and the top 7 teams scored points because, no, well, not really. 6 teams scored points because Ocon and Ricciardo are there. But great performance by Ocon. He announced he's going to Haas. Everyone questions always every time it's Esteban Ocon. He just has that perception. In the wet, he put it in Q3. He's made use of that position to deliver points when Alpine announced that there's going to be yet another change in their management.
Yeah, exactly. And I finally feel that Haas has a settled driver lineup. Interestingly, in their 9-year Formula One history, Haas has had 2 experienced drivers in their lineup for 8 seasons. In the one season where they didn't, we got to witness the magic of Nikita Mazepin and the struggles of Mick Schumacher. Wonderful. Pure vibes. Peak memories. I love it. But now for the first time... But now for the first time, Haas are in a situation where they have an aggressive, experienced statesman of sorts in Esteban Ocon, which is important, by the way, because they need someone to fight for the points with their elbows out, because they barely are ever in there. So when you are in there, you need someone who's going to put their life on their line for it. Esteban Ocon will do that. And they have a youngster who has a very high potential to go up ahead. So for once, I feel Haas are moving in the right direction with their drivers. And with that happening, with Mercedes winning races, with Ferrari getting pole position, with Red Bull now slipping up and Verstappen still doing a great job, and McLaren dropping the ball once again, and there's chaos everywhere. It's like Formula One is back. What a way to spend a weekend.
Yes, and since you mentioned Esteban Ocon, he has jumped Alexander Albon for 17th place in the Drivers' Championship. He's got 5 points. Daniel Ricciardo, after a very tough start to the season, is actually just 10 points away from Yuki Tsunoda, who, by the way, is on equal points with Nico Hülkenberg, since Hülkenberg hasn't scored in 2 races himself. And Hülkenberg and Tsunoda are just 2 points away from Lance Stroll for 10th place in the Drivers' Championship, since The Drivers' Championship is always what we enjoy the most. But when it comes to the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes have pulled a mammoth number of points on pretty much the top three teams, I would say, in the last 5 or 6 races. So in the last 6-7 weeks, Mercedes has gone incredibly, charging ahead. And if this is the trajectory, Somil, could Mercedes even target Ferrari's third place in the Constructors' Championship? At the moment, it's about an 80-point gap. But if they continue the way they do, and the way they've been outscoring Ferrari, you never know if that's something that could go their way as well.
And knowing Ferrari, they wouldn't even know what hit him. That's just the way things go for them. Oh, man.
Yes. Carlos Sainz, since you're, of course, disappointed with him, he said two really funny things. Of course, the first one was not funny. After qualifying, the reason why he was so off Leclerc is because his tires started to overheat and he didn't really have them in the right window, which is fine, understandable. The second reason why what he said was funny was post-race. Even the chief strategy officer of Ferrari, who is Carlos Sainz, was puzzled at Russell's one-stop strategy. And of course, he immediately jumped on to say, maybe we should have tried the same strategy. And why?
Ooh.
Because there was a point of time when Carlos Sainz was running in the top 3 before he had to pit, because he started on the hard tire, if you remember.
And they were contemplating a one-stop, And Sundaram and I watching at the event were baffled, thinking, should we consider that as something? Should we track that? And we very conveniently said, nah, let it be. They're probably going to box him anyway. And they did. But we should have tracked that, because you never know. Sometimes these nuggets end up slipping away until everyone collectively realizes, oh, wait a second. And that moment of, oh, wait a second. I know I'm going on and on about it again, but man, I wish you guys were here with us for our event in Mumbai, because you could collectively see heads turn. People be like, ooh, something's happening here. Something's interesting. Until they started hearing the radio messages and they were very clearly aware that Russell was about to win. Man, this is great fun.
It absolutely is great fun. I can't wait for the summer break, because I know we always have specials planned, you, me, and Sundaram. So we've had 14 races. That's more than 28 episodes that we've done. We've had Otmar Safnauer. We've had several other guests who've come and gone, Ravi Shastri, of course. So we've had a fantastic first half of the season, including all these events that Social organizes and invites us to host them. 140 people is absolutely, more than 100% capacity at Social. But that's what people like to do. They love to watch races with us. And that's also why one of the reasons we are, awarded India's best sports podcast.
And India's best sports podcast will be on a small break for a few days. We need to calm our minds down. But again, as is the tradition, there will be an episode every single week, and the content never stops, even in the summer break. A mid-season review will be here, a list of things, very interesting things that you must have missed in the season, but we spotted, will also be here. And we're trying to get a few interesting guests on the podcast too, as we always are. So there is no reason to tune away from us. The world of Formula One might be sleeping, but we never are. Which is described by the fact that it's 1:52 in the night, and I should probably go to sleep. Which is why, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and this has been the Inside Line F1 podcast. Please wish a very happy birthday to F1 Stats Guru Sundaram, and we will see you in a week's time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye. And oh, by the way, make sure you are not underweight. Is that the right thing? Is that a thing?
There is, absolutely. The way you can be overweight and obese in real life, you got to make sure you're not underweight either. Absolutely.
Lesson learned. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.